In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to make a wrist hand finger orthosis or a resting pan orthosis. First, you're going to make your pattern. I've already made mine, and there's a separate video that shows you how to do that. Once you've made your pattern, you want to check it on your client to make sure that your paper pattern looks like it's going to fit. Here I think we're doing pretty good all the way around. We have a little room on all sides to wrap around. If there were a problem with fit, I would just draw on this, and so when I trace it on my thermoplastic, I can expand it a little bit or cut it down a little bit somewhere else. Alrighty. So here we have the thermoplastic, and then you're just going to take your pattern, put that on there, and use your scratch awl to trace around that and get your pattern traced into your thermoplastic, which I've already done, and you can kind of see that that's scratched in there. Next, we're going to put that into our orthosis warming tank and warm it up. So now I'm just gonna cut this out, and I have my material warm to a point where it's reasonably easy to cut. It's not really flexible yet because I don't need it to be. In fact, if it's really soft when you cut it, it's almost a little harder because then you get fingerprints and stuff. This thumb piece a little bit. All right, so now we have our splint cut out and to shape. We'll put it back in the hot water. Can I have your hand like this? There we go. So I'm going to position my patient's hand with the thumb in more or less palmar abduction, fingers more or less straight, relaxed, wrist pretty straight. And then we're going to, first thing I do is I just line up the thumb part into the web space. And then once I have that lined up how it needs to be, then you start with contouring around the forearm a little bit, contouring around the sides of the hand a little bit. You want to make sure that you have a contour around the side of the hand, and particularly around the ulnar side of the wrist. That's what's going to give it some rigidity. And then around this side of the hand. Once you have that, I'm going to turn you a little. You're going to work on the contour around the thumb, but one of the things for the contour around the thumb is on the back side here, you have to really stretch this part that goes through the thumb web space. Really stretch that out and then kind of fold it back around the thumb web space, kind of like that. And that is key for that part. And then for the thumb itself, you just kind of contour it around the thumb. How you come around the thumb will depend on what your client's thumb wants to do. Sometimes it wants to adduct, sometimes it wants to flex. Typically this is an orthosis made for a someone with a neurological diagnosis, so they may have some tone. Once you've done that, get in here and get your arches of the hand. So we're looking for a nice longitudinal arch that way. And then also we want a nice transverse arch. It should be kind of concave. So I'm going in here and trying to get that concavity to go all the way distal. Meanwhile, I'm making sure that I keep my contours around the sides as well to give it that rigidity. One of the things that you may find is sometimes your client will go into a little wrist flexion. If you don't want that, you may have to restore some wrist extension. But we're doing pretty good here with our shape. That looks pretty good to me. I'm gonna just draw in here. I have some extra material by the thumb, which is great because you can always cut it off. So I'm just gonna trim that about like that, and then maybe trim this, something like that. Other than that, I think my trim lines are looking pretty good. For the sides of the fingers, you want to wrap around the side, but you don't want to go beyond the back of the finger because then your strap won't have anything to grab onto. That looks good on that side. On this side, it's a little harder for my client to move that way. But I am, here, let's go this way. We'll do it this way. This is a little too high on this side because the splint is more dorsal than my client's fingers are. So I need to trim that back just a little bit. I'm gonna just kind of draw where that finger goes. And I also have a fair amount of extra material here. I like a little extra, but I don't need this much extra. So we're just gonna trim that a little bit. All right. So this is still warm enough, probably, that I can cut. So I'm just gonna go ahead and trim that. If it had cooled down, you could just dip it again for, 15, 30 seconds and get it warm enough to cut again. I'm gonna go around the thumb this way. It's starting to get a little too cool to cut here, but this is all I have to do yet, so we'll just go with that. All right, so now I'm gonna check my fit again and just have my client kind of come in here. This looks pretty good. The one thing you do want to look for is that ulnar head and whether or not the edge of your orthosis is going to be too near to that ulnar head. I could trim this back just a little bit, and that would probably be, staying on the safe side. But even so, it's really not into it, so I'm not too worried about it. I'll probably trim that back just a little. Other than that, we're looking pretty good with all of our trim lines. So let me just find that wrist part and trim that back just a little bit, about like that. All right, so now we have our shape formed, and at this point we just need to work on the edges and do some strapping. For the edges, I like to use the Orthosis warmer, the hot water, and just dip it in the hot water and then smooth out my edges. This is a stiffer material that we're using, given that we're working with a neurologic population. I like to work with a material that's a little stiffer, doesn't drape so much, just because if their tone kicks up, then they're not gonna scrunch the orthosis. So to work on the edges, I'm just dipping this in here just a little bit. I like to kind of move it around a little bit so I don't have a distinct hot-cold kind of line in the plastic. And once it's warmed up, I just take the side of my finger and smooth that edge from the inside out. On the proximal edge here, you'll see I like to flare it a little bit to make it nice and comfortable on the proximal forearm. Then we're just dipping the edges a little like this, kind of wiggle it around up and down a little bit. And same thing, just take that inside, I'll show it from this side, and just kind of round or flare it back a little bit. It doesn't have to fold over on itself by any means. You just want to have any kind of sharpness of the edge away from the client. I had kind of an unfortunate hole here, but I just kind of worked on that, and now there's no sharpness there anymore. And just keep working your way all the way around the orthosis. Because this is a stiffer material, typically we might make this out of Easy Form or Solaris. The edges do take a little bit more work than they would with a softer material like Polyform or Clinic. So now you can see we have the orthosis all contoured. All the edges have been smoothed away from the inside of the orthosis or away from the client. Just want to point out a couple of things. You'll see in the thumb here how this has been really folded back. That gives that thumb some good rigidity. Also, you'll see here how I have maintained that distal transverse arch so that when the client's in it, their fingers have room to kind of spread apart. If you had it more of a concavity here, their fingers would get all mushed together. And that you don't want. It'll actually hurt after a while. So I think we're good and we're ready to put some strapping on this. Places we're going to strap are the forearm, the wrist, the MCP joints, and that's really important, especially if they have flexor tone, to have right over the back of the MCPs. That's where you want your strap. And then something in the fingers to hold the fingers in place too. I'll often put a strap around the thumb too. Generally the strap around the thumb I don't take off when I take the orthosis off and on my client. They just kind of slide into that. So let's get some strapping on here. Let's start with this one here. You want to round the corners of your self-adhesive Velcro so that there's no corners to pull off when the person is putting the straps on and off. I also like to go with one big piece all the way across, because if I do that, then when I put the strapping on, strapping goes on like this, and when you pull the strapping off, you're not pulling on an edge, pulling on the middle of the self-adhesive Velcro, so it tends not to want to come off then. Whereas if this were two smaller pieces, kind of like that, and then I were to have my strap come across that, then whenever you pull the strap off, you're actually pulling the Velcro self-adhesive hook away as well. So I put one piece all the way across, and that tends to last much longer. The other thing you're going to want to do is to use your heat gun to warm up the self-adhesive on the back of the self-adhesive hook. And so what you're going to do is you're going to take that, just stick it on a scissors like that, and then go ahead and heat up the adhesive, the goo, on the back of the self-adhesive Velcro. And then also heat up a little bit where you're going to put it on the orthosis, just enough to make it a little bit shiny. And then once you've done that, you're just going to stick this right on your orthosis, like that. and smooth it out. And then if you take this and really push it in there and kind of moosh it in, that's going to stay for a very long time. That's not going to let go. So let's get a good piece around the wrist as well. And that looks good for around the wrist. Might be just a little short. Let me see. Here, I have a little longer piece. I'm going to try that for now. So then let's cut a piece for around the wrist. And I'm going to go from here about over to here. And we'll trim that. Again, cutting the ends rounded. And take that off. Put it on our scissors. Use the heat gun to heat up the goo on the back of it. Like that. Use the heat gun to heat where that strap is going to go as well. Now this strap, you want to make sure you get right at the wrist joint. You don't want it proximal on the forearm. You want it right at the wrist joint. So I'm going to look at where the heel of the hand was, and I'm going to put it right there across where those carpal bones are. More or less like that. Push that in. That one actually ended up a little long now. But there we go. Okay, so I'm going to check this on my client here a minute. And we'll slide that on, and that's looking good so far. Now I want to pay attention to where these metacarpals are. So I'm palpating for the metacarpal joint, metacarpal phalangeal joint. And one on this side, it's about right here. And then on the ulnar side, it's about right here. And that's where I'm going to put my strapping. I can also mark, as long as I'm here, where the PIP joints are, because that's where my other strap is going to go, is over the PIP joints. All right. And so I can just kind of connect my lines here a little bit for my Velcro. So here we are for the MCP joint. Again, heat it up before you put it on. Get the goo super gooey. And then same thing with my orthosis. Heat the plastic up just so enough so it's a little shiny. Get my Velcro hook one more time. Then I'm going to just lay that right where it needs to go, about like that. And really moosh that in there and press it, slide it around a little bit, and that'll be quite secure. Got one left to do for the proximal interphalangeal joints. That's going to go here. Take that off. Get my heat gun. Warm that up. Okay, warm the orthosis up. Just enough to get it a little shiny. And this material doesn't get real shiny, but you can tell the difference. And we'll put that one down right about there. All right, there we go. Very lastly, we have to make something for the thumb here. And I'm just gonna put that kind of around the mid part of the thumb right there. Same process. Heating up my Velcro. Heat up the back of the orthosis a little bit. And I'm just going to put that right there, kind of midway up the thumb. There we go. So that's what we need for Velcro. Then we can look at the strapping. I think I'm done with my heat gun, so I'm going to turn it from hot to cool and let it cool off before I turn it off completely. So get my client's arm in here again, and I like to put the wrist strap on first, because once the wrist strap is on there, things are held reasonably securely, and I can do the others without it flopping all over. So here we go for the wrist strap. Always give them a little extra. You want to completely cover that hook, because if you don't completely cover the hook, they'll stick to everything. So you want to completely cover the hook and then give them a little bit extra so they can have something to grab onto when they want to take it off, and also so they can strap it a little looser, a little tighter, depending on what their needs are. So I'm going to do something like that. Then that'll overlap a little bit, and they'll have a little extra. I tend to strap too tight when I put it on, but my client can find the sweet spot on the strapping themselves. Same sort of thing, I'm rounding the ends, and go here, all the way around there, give them just a little bit extra. You'll notice, by the way, I'm not cutting this strapping while it's attached to my client's orthosis. I take it off. You want to minimize the risk of you hurting your client with the scissors. And we got something about like that. This one often will kind of come down at an angle on both sides because of the contour of the forearm, but that's fine. So those are 2-inch straps, and I want 2-inch straps here and here to distribute the pressure so that if there is any swelling, I'm not holding that swelling into the hand. Over the back of the MCP joints, metacarpophalangeal joints, I'm going to use a 1-inch strap because I really want a little more pressure there to hold those into the orthosis. If my client has flexor tone, they're going to tend to want to do this, or tend to want to kind of buck out like this. So I need some good pressure on the back of that to hold things where they should stay. So I'm going to put that there around the backs of those MCP joints, back here, and again, give it just a little bit extra. You can always cut a little off, you can't put it back on. Oopsies. All right, let's just pull this loose. Put this part on first. All right, and so now we have a good strap across the back of the MCP joints. Then lastly, we may or may not need a strap for the fingers. It depends on your client, whether they have a lot of tone or not. If they do have significant flexor tone that they tend to kind of pull back like this, I actually like to put a 2-inch strap across the fingers because that covers everything just a little bit easier and prevents them from kind of bucking out of it like that. And so again, go across here, give them just a little bit extra. Now, how much you actually need this finger strap will really depend on your client and their diagnosis. If they have flexor tone, you'll probably need it. If you're making this for, say, someone with rheumatoid arthritis, just as a night resting orthosis, you probably don't need that at all. For the thumb then, I'm just going to do a little strap that kind of goes around the thumb just to keep it from sliding off of that little trough. And I usually don't need to do a whole lot with the thumb, because I've already positioned this thumb trough either here or rotated around a little bit so that whatever tone they may have, they're pushing into their orthosis, not pushing against the strap. So there we go. And that's kind of what it looks like.